Hey, good morning, folks. It's early Saturday morning, although it doesn't always feel like Saturday. We're in such a strange season here that the weekdays and the weekends sort of blur together, but that has its own sort of beauty as well. This is Jerome, and I'd like to share a few thoughts with you today on how to thrive when we're on lockdown. Last year I got trained for a disaster assistance response team. I haven't even been deployed yet. But when there's a disaster anywhere in the world, I can get called up and asked to get on a plane within 24 hours. I'm learning that first responders are a bit of a different breed. As you know, when everyone else is running away from a crisis, this bunch is running toward the problem. And it makes for kind of a different mindset. So when tragedy strikes, first responders grieve along with everyone else. There's a loss that we've experienced as a community. But part of them gets excited. It's kind of strange, but it's like, man, this is what I was trained for. This is what I'm meant to do. And so here's the connection. Christianity, was forged in crisis. And as Christ followers, we're meant for such a time as this. Like for real. And unfortunately, the church doesn't always equip us to actually be the hands and feet of Jesus. A lot of times there's more attention paid to just making our lives comfortable. And I'm not trying to be critical. I'm trying to say that this is our time as believers. And the coronavirus has really provided us with an amazing opportunity to love and serve people right when they're at their most vulnerable. And that's not to be uncaring about the actual suffering that's taking place, because that touches all of us, and we do grieve that. But here's the thing: for us to be able to respond to other people well, we've got to be healthy ourselves. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. The training I attended last month with this group, this response group, was on spiritual and emotional first aid, and that was one of the things they really emphasized is self-care. So if we're going to be any good for those that are around us, we've got to be healthy ourselves. Remember the whole put on your own oxygen mask first thing? It's kind of the same sort of deal. We have to be really receiving the life and sustenance that we need in our own souls so that we can be a life and sustenance to others. Okay, a little bit of a flyer here, but it'll tie in. Remember what a gyroscope is? Wikipedia tells me that the first use was back in 1743, although it didn't really see widespread industrial application until the next century. But essentially, a gyroscope works by putting some sort of a disc into motion, and then that disc is mounted in a frame that can move every direction, horizontally and vertically. So that disc, once it starts spinning, it just keeps spinning, and it keeps spinning in the same direction, no matter how the orientation of the frame goes. So I printed out this little diagram. I don't understand any of those words, but that's the basic idea of it. So that little disc gets spinning. It's probably not little. It probably has some size to it, some mass, so that it as long as that motion stays going, you have a true north that you can work from. And so this was put into airplanes and ships and submarines and used for navigation, because it would be a fixed point, no matter whether you're in the fog or upside down or sideways. Boy, it's orienting. It holds its direction. And that's something that I think is a beautiful example of what our hearts really need in a time where everything feels a little bit off kilter. Is we need that inner gyroscope going. We need that true north that just holds us. This is what's true. This is what's good. This is what's beautiful. This is how to stay aligned in a life that's really strange, really disorienting, right? So I've been thinking about what are some of the things that can function like a gyroscope. For me, I've been reaching for this for myself. And, for me, right now, one of those things is Lent. So maybe you've been following my weekly post on Lent. This is really the first year I've engaged this practice in a more intentional way, and it's been something that keeps bringing me back, in a sense, to a way of being in the world and a place to focus some of my attention, which is on this 40 days of renewal, this 40 days of reflection, and just being before God, saying, Lord, what would you have to say to me in this time? Kind of an additional attentiveness. It's been challenging for me, but it's been a securing force for me. There's sort of a continuity and a stability to staying in step with this ancient rhythm, that moves us from Ash Wednesday to Easter. This is a rhythm that's been in place for, a couple thousand years in some form. So it's a gyroscope that doesn't wobble with the news. It doesn't flip-flop around. Another thing that's been a gyroscope for me that I commend to you is the outdoors. Getting outside. If you can get outside, some of my friends on the West Coast where they lockdown is a whole nother level. And my heart is with them. Those of us in other places of the country that still have the freedom to be able to get outside and take a hike, or I got on my first road bike trip of the season trip, just out for an hour, and on the Parkway. It was beautiful. It was refreshing. It's more than just fresh air, which is a good thing. The outdoors, the creation of God is rooted, like literally rooted. There's a stability to it, and it stays doing its thing no matter the human drama taking place around us, and that's just sort of realigning for me, being out in that space and experiencing God and the beauty in the new flowers that are starting to come here as spring emerges is that's a gyroscope for my soul. One more for you. You can think of many of these, I'm sure, and I encourage you to think of what are the things that really secure the heart when there's a bit of a storm outside. The Lord's Prayer is one of those things for me, and I'm just wondering, when's the last time you've prayed the Lord's Prayer? Some of you are in more liturgical traditions, and that's a regular part of your practice. But for the first 4 decades of my life, I knew it. I read it when I would read through the Bible, but it wasn't really something I ever prayed out. I mean, just like every now and then, maybe a handful of times. These days, Kelly and I are praying it most days as we end our time of centering prayer together. And it's just, I find it orienting. It's just like covering some of the things that are most true in the world. That we have a Father that lives in heaven, but the kingdom of heaven, and that His name is beautiful and hallowed, and asking for God's will to be done, especially when people are suffering, and God's will to be done in my own life and in the lives of those around me. These are just things that are deeply true. My need for forgiveness, the call for me to forgive and to be sustained in an evil time. So that might be something to kind of, as it were, blow the dust off of and enjoy that prayer that's been an orienting force for centuries. Quick word of caution on something that can be disorienting in our lives, and that is binging on the news. So, when things are strange and intimidating, it's super easy just to kind of glut ourselves with information. And the media channels, man, they'll fill every moment with commentary. And there's some good things to be had there. But there's also something that tends to dull and disorient the soul with media. It can become sort of a drug that feeds on itself. Like the more you hear, the more you want, and it's something we kind of we're looking for a little bit of control in a time that feels out of control. And information sometimes can feel that way. Sometimes it's more just trying to salve our personal anxiety or just kind of curious about how it's affecting the rest of the world. But these dynamics, when you get hit a certain threshold, it tends to actually inflame anxiety and erode our stability. And it certainly can just be a distraction from the opportunities that are really around us to be present to our world in a new way. So when life gets strange, we have the chance to do some things differently. So let's get back to this idea of being a first responder with the love and care of Christ. What could that look like? Well, love and care begins in the home. So we have an opportunity to engage our spouse and our children in more intentional ways. Play games together, go for a hike, make fun food, talk. We've got a lot of really, really precious ways to be together as families. Even reaching out to our extended family, folks that we may not talk with all that often, call or Skype or Zoom or whatever. But we've got some space. I know most of us are still working in some form. It's not like we're on vacation, but we also have some opportunities, some space here. Neighbors are the ones that often we have the most physical proximity to, like our natural neighbors, those that live up and down the street from us, especially those that might be sick or old. And if you're, again, not completely sequestered, look for practical ways to be of help to those that are in need. Maybe someone needs some help picking up groceries or with some other practical, medicine. Think about your coworkers. You may still be engaging with them online and in important ways, but this can be an opportunity to really check on their souls. Ask how they're doing in a meaningful way, and to whatever extent feels authentic, to really reach for what's like, how are you doing really, and maybe even sharing some of the things that you're working through, either in the challenges that you're feeling or the opportunities that you're experiencing. You're probably thinking of even more groups, people that you can connect with. Let's let God stir our hearts with fresh compassion and creative ways to express that love and care. A friend of mine told me this week that he was trying to just patronize the local restaurants, to do takeout, since that's still available here. And it's like, oh man, that's brilliant. What a beautiful way to continue to serve our local economy, especially those that are just really taking it on the chin right now, which our restaurants are, and many of our service industries are. So that's just a kind and creative way to continue to love and serve people. Just a couple last thoughts before I let you go into your Saturday. Couple of other potential benefits for being in a season like this that's really tough. And the first is this sense of solidarity. Much of the world lives with some form of this kind of uncertainty and threat. Not a virus, but something, whether it's food insecurity or they're displaced truly, and there's some sort of threat facing them on a daily or regular basis. We can't really comprehend that as Americans, but this is true. And I think that going through, probably for the first time ever, a truly global crisis reminds us that we are connected to the rest of the world. And I hope that it brings a fresh sense that we need to be in love and prayer for those that are in need, no matter where they are, that experience this on a much more severe level and a much more frequent level. Our world's going to return to normal in a relatively short amount of time, but that won't be true for many. So let's pray for those who are dealing with anxiety pretty much constantly. And then, humility is the next and last point that I wanted to just mention with you. And here's what I mean by that. Um, we probably know folks that are just so driven in their work that they basically work themselves until they get sick. And maybe we've been that person who just, can't find it in ourselves to pull back and take a weekend or take a Sabbath. And so it's just push, push, push. And and at some point their body says, "Hey, you're abusing me. I'm quitting." And it's kind of a sense of taking a forced rest, a forced sabbatical. And maybe there's some sense. I definitely don't see this virus as punitive, but I do think that sometimes just the laws of nature do catch up with us, and that there's an invitation to rest. We're called to a rhythm of work and rest, and sometimes life comes to sort of collect its due of lost Sabbaths. And it's just sort of a law of nature. So that's a gift, and I think maybe the thing I most want to leave with you today is that there is a gift within every difficult space and difficult season. Let's find that gift. Let's care well for ourselves and for our families, and let's care well for those that are around us. All right? Sound like a good thing? All right. Love and peace. Jerome.